It was supposed to be the best night of her life. June 10th, prom night. 18-year-old Sophie Lane, bright, beautiful, and full of life, was last seen leaving the college gymnasium with her longtime friend, Adam Carter. The two had grown up together, and when neither had a date for prom, they agreed to go as friends. Security footage showed them laughing, holding hands as they walked out into the warm night air. But Sophie never made it home. The next morning, her body was found in the woods behind the school, her dress torn, bruises covering her body, and the undeniable evidence of a brutal assault. She had been strangled to death. The town of Willow Creek was shaken to its core. And the last person seen with her? Adam Carter. Adam was arrested almost immediately. His story had holes. He claimed to have walked Sophie home and left her at her doorstep, but forensic evidence said otherwise. Dirt and scratches covered his arms, and a deep cut on his hand suggested a struggle. His car's floor mat had traces of blood. The court of public opinion had already decided Adam was guilty. Social media exploded with theories. It's always the ones closest to you. He was in love with her, and she rejected him. But Detective Evelyn Ross wasn't convinced. Something felt off. Adam maintained his innocence, swearing he left Sophie safe and sound. His tears seemed genuine. His alibi flimsy, but not impossible. And then came the first major twist. DNA found under Sophie's fingernails? It wasn't Adam's. Just like that, everything changed. If not Adam, then who? With Adam no longer the prime suspect, Detective Ross dug deeper. Who else had access to Sophie that night? Who had a motive? Who had something to hide? Sophie lived with her adoptive father, Richard Lane. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and Richard had raised her alone. By all accounts, he was a loving and devoted father. But as Ross began interviewing Sophie's closest friends, an unsettling pattern emerged. Sophie wasn't allowed to date. She had an 8 p.m. curfew, even as a college freshman. Her father controlled every aspect of her life, from her wardrobe to her friendships. Then, Ross found Sophie's diary hidden beneath her mattress. What she read made her stomach turn. Dad watches me when I sleep. I feel like I'm suffocating. I need to leave this house. The town had always seen Richard as a grieving widower, a man who had selflessly raised a daughter alone. But what if there was something far darker beneath the surface? Ross had Richard brought in for questioning. He was cooperative, devastated, and adamant that he had been asleep the night Sophie was murdered. There was no evidence tying him to the crime. Until the second twist. A routine DNA test confirmed the unthinkable. Richard Lane was not Sophie's biological father. Ross traced back to Sophie's birth records. That's when she uncovered the horrifying truth. 18 years ago, Richard and his wife, Emily, had been the victims of a brutal home invasion. 3 masked men had broken in. Richard was tied up, forced to watch as Emily was assaulted. Weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. Richard begged her to abort, but Emily refused. She believed the baby was innocent. But Richard, he never saw Sophie as an innocent child. He saw her as a walking, breathing reminder that night. For years, he buried the rage, the resentment, until prom night, seeing Sophie in her dress, looking just like her mother, something inside him snapped. He waited for her to come home. He confronted her. The argument turned violent. Decades of trauma exploded in the worst possible way. And in that moment, Richard Lane became a monster. Ross had him. Everything made sense. The DNA, the diary, the trauma, the motive. She prepared for an arrest. But Richard Lane wasn't done yet. By the time the police arrived at his house, he was gone. A single note was left behind. You don't understand. I had no choice. And I'm not finished yet. Ross's blood ran cold. Sophie wasn't Richard's only daughter. He had another, and she was next. Detective Evelyn Ross had seen her fair share of horrors, but this was something else. Richard Lane was gone, and his chilling note, I had no choice, and I'm not finished yet, sent shivers down her spine, because Richard had another daughter, and she was next. Ross didn't have much to go on. Richard had no family left, no known close friends, but his disappearance meant one thing. He had planned this. He wasn't running out of fear. he was running with intent. A frantic search of his home revealed something unexpected. A hidden compartment behind his bedroom closet. Inside, Ross found stacks of letters, all addressed to someone named Elena Foster. Who was Elena? A quick search revealed the truth. Elena Foster was Richard Lane's biological daughter, born from an affair years before he met Emily. She had been given up for adoption as an infant and had no idea who her real father was. Now, 22 years old, she was living alone in a small town 2 hours away. Ross grabbed her car keys. Time was running out. Elena Foster had never heard the name Richard Lane before Detective Ross showed up at her door, flashing a badge and a picture of the man she had no memory of. "Is this a joke?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I don't know him." Ross didn't have time to explain everything. "You're in danger. We need to get you somewhere safe." Elena hesitated, but the genuine fear in Ross's eyes told her everything she needed to know. They were halfway down the apartment stairwell when Ross's phone buzzed. A single text message from an unknown number. Too late. Ross's heart stopped. She turned just as the glass door at the building's entrance shattered. Richard Lane had found them. Ross barely had time to react before Richard burst through the broken doorway, his eyes wild, his face streaked with sweat and fury. He wasn't holding a gun. He had something worse. A syringe. "Elena," he called out, voice eerily calm. "Come with me. We need to talk." Elena froze, her mind struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding in front of her. Ross reached for her gun. "Richard, don't move." But Richard was fast, faster than a man his age should be. He lunged forward, grabbing Elena's wrist. She screamed, struggling against his iron grip. The syringe was inches from her skin. A gunshot rang out. Richard staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in pain. But he didn't stop. He turned to Elena, his voice shaking. "I'm doing this for you." Ross fired again, this time hitting his leg. Richard crumpled to the ground, the syringe rolling away. Blood pooled beneath him, but even then he was smiling. "You don't understand," he rasped, staring at Ross. "I saved her, and now you've ruined everything." Ross knelt down, her gun still aimed at his chest. "Tell me what that means." Richard just chuckled. "You really think I was working alone?" Ross's stomach twisted. Then Richard did something she didn't expect. He pressed his own bloody hand against his lips and whispered something. Elena gasped, "Oh my God!" "What?" Ross demanded, pulse racing. Elena turned to her, her face drained of color. "That's what my mother used to do. It was her way of saying goodbye." Ross felt ice spread through her veins. Richard Lane wasn't just hunting his daughters. Someone else was helping him, and they weren't finished yet. Richard was rushed to the hospital under heavy police guard. His injuries weren't fatal, but that didn't mean he was talking. Every question was met with silence or a knowing smirk. He had already won. At least, that's what his expression said. Ross wasn't buying it. She knew killers. She knew the ones who enjoyed taunting, who wanted control even when they were handcuffed to a hospital bed. But this wasn't just about Richard. It was bigger. As she was about to leave the hospital, her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "You think it's over? You have no idea what's coming." Ross's blood ran cold. She turned back to Richard's room, but he was already staring at her through the glass, a small, satisfied grin on his lips. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Detective Evelyn Ross had always trusted her instincts. They had saved her life more times than she could count. But right now, her instincts told her one thing. She was already too late. Richard Lane was locked up, but the real threat was still out there. And whoever they were watching. Ross stared at her phone, rereading the chilling text. "You think it's over? You have no idea what's coming." Who was sending these messages? And how did they know Richard's plan? Back at the precinct, she put a tech team on tracing the number, but the results weren't what she expected. The text had been sent from a burner phone, one purchased just a week ago, but there was something else. The location where the phone was last used, just outside the hospital where Richard was being held. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. Ross grabbed her coat and headed back to the hospital. Ross found Richard Lane in his hospital room, handcuffed to the bed, his expression eerily calm. He looked up at her as she entered, as if he had been expecting her. "I was wondering when you come back," he murmured. Ross sat down across from him. "Who's helping you, Richard?" He smiled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you?" Ross leaned in. "You're locked up. Your plan failed. But someone else is out there, and I promise you I will find them." Richard's expression darkened. "Failed? No, detective. You're just playing into their hands." A chill ran down Ross's spine. "Who is they?" Richard exhaled slowly, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You think you're in control, but you're already a part of this. Just like Elena, just like Emma." Ross's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, just like Emma?" Richard grinned. "Ask yourself, detective. What if Emma Carter's death wasn't the beginning? What if it was just another step in something much, much bigger?" Ross's heart pounded. Was this case bigger than she had thought? Was Emma's murder part of something larger? Before she could press further, a nurse rushed into the room. "Detective, you need to come with me. Now." Ross followed the nurse down the hall, her pulse racing. She had left Elena Foster in a secure hospital room with an armed officer. But when she stepped inside, her stomach dropped. The room was empty. The officer who had been guarding her was slumped against the wall, unconscious, a small syringe discarded nearby. Elena was gone. Ross's phone buzzed again. A new text message. "You didn't listen. Now she's mine." Ross clenched her fists. She had underestimated this. Someone was orchestrating this in the shadows, and she had just played right into their hands. Elena was in danger, and the nightmare was far from over. Detective Evelyn Ross felt the weight of failure pressing against her chest. Elena was gone, snatched from what was supposed to be a secure location. The cryptic messages, the lingering presence of an unseen enemy. Whoever was behind this was always one step ahead. But Ross was done playing defense. It was time to strike back. Ross stormed back into Richard Lane's hospital room. He was still lying in bed, smug as ever, the blood-stained bandages on his shoulder and legs stark against his pale skin. "Where is she?" Ross demanded, barely keeping her voice from shaking with fury. Richard chuckled. "You're asking the wrong questions, detective." Ross gritted her teeth. "Who took her?" Richard's smile widened. "Now you're getting closer." Ross grabbed a chair and sat inches from him, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You're running out of time, Richard. If she dies, I'll make sure you rot in a hole so deep they'll forget you ever existed." Richard tilted his head. "That's the thing, detective. I was never the one in control." A shiver ran down Ross's spine. She had spent all this time hunting Richard Lane, but he had been a pawn all along. Who was really pulling the strings? Back at the precinct, the forensic team analyzed a syringe found in Elena's hospital room. The results were shocking. The substance used to sedate the officer was nearly identical to the one that had been found in Emma Carter's system. This wasn't a copycat. This was the same killer. A sudden realization struck Ross like a freight train. Emma Carter wasn't the beginning of this case, and Richard Lane had only been a distraction. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. A video file. Ross hesitated before opening it. The grainy footage showed Elena, bound to a chair in a dimly lit room, her face streaked with tears. A shadow moved behind her, and then a voice, distorted but eerily familiar, spoke. "You're getting close, detective, but not close enough." Then the video cut off. Ross exhaled sharply. The walls were closing in, but she refused to let this end in another body bag. The team worked tirelessly, analyzing the video. Background noises hinted at an industrial setting. Dripping water, faint echoes, the hum of distant machinery. Ross's partner, Detective Mark Hayes, burst into the room. "We might have something," he said, setting a file on the table. Security footage near the hospital shows a van speeding off around the time Elena was taken. Ross scanned the report, registered to a fake name. Of course. Hayes smirked. "Yeah, but the plates were stolen from a real vehicle, one registered to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town." Ross grabbed her gun. "Let's move." The warehouse loomed like a skeletal beast against the night sky. Ross's heart pounded as she and Hayes approached, weapons drawn. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something metallic. Blood. They moved carefully through the shadows until they reached a dimly lit back room. And there she was, Elena, tied to the chair, barely conscious. A thin line of blood trickled down her temple. Ross's stomach twisted in rage. Then a voice in the darkness. "I was hoping you'd find us." A figure emerged, a woman, draped in black, her eyes sharp with madness. Ross's breath caught in her throat. It was the nurse from Richard's hospital room. The pieces clicked into place. She had been right under their noses the entire time, slipping in and out of the investigation without raising suspicion. The nurse smirked. Richard was never meant to succeed. He was a broken man, easy to manipulate. Ross steadied her aim. And Sophie? Elena? What was the point? The woman's expression darkened. I needed him to suffer. Hayes stiffened beside Ross. Why? The nurse tilted her head. Because Emma was my niece. Silence fell like a hammer. Ross's mind raced. If that was true, then this had never been about Richard at all. It was revenge. Pure, unfiltered revenge. Ross barely had time to react before the woman pulled a knife from her coat and lunged. A shot rang out. The woman collapsed, gasping as blood spread across her chest. Hayes had fired first. She looked up at Ross, her breath shallow. You don't understand. Her body went still. Ross exhaled, hand shaking. It was over, or so she thought. A faint beeping sound caught her attention. Ross turned, her eyes widening as she saw a small device strapped to the back of Elena's chair. A bomb. The timer read 007. Ross's pulse skyrocketed. Move! She and Hayes lunged forward, freeing Elena as fast as they could. With only seconds left, they dragged her out of the room, sprinting for the exit. The explosion ripped through the warehouse just as they made it outside, sending a fireball into the night sky. Ross shielded Elena with her body as debris rained down around them. The heat was unbearable. The force of the blast knocked them to the ground. Then silence. Ross sat up, coughing as dust filled the air. Hayes groaned beside her, clutching his arm. Elena was shaking but alive. But something wasn't right. Ross reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around her phone. Another message had come through. A single line. You stopped her, but you'll never stop me. Ross's breath hitched. The mastermind was still out there, and they weren't done yet. The end. Or is it?